Crisis has a tendency to stimulate change. It compels people to rethink the way that we do things. After World War II, the United Nations was established with the aim of preventing future conflicts. After the immediate aftermath of 9/11, there was a 20% reported uptick in Americans spending more time with their family and going to church. After COVID, people really realized the importance of time, and the greater emphasis was put on the quality of life and self-care. Now, 1929 was no different. With the onset of the Great Depression, it saw widespread poverty, unemployment, and a decline in industrial output. It was an economic crisis unparalleled in the history of industrialized society. Consider this situation. I need to get to point B, but this is all the information I've been given. It's a blank canvas, as you can see, as I can see. I don't know where I'm starting, I don't know what direction to take. And America found itself in a similar position in 1929. So when America tried to resolve the economic crisis, the president at the time, Herbert Hoover, went to his advisors and asked, "What's the national income figures?" Their response, "We don't know." He then asked, "Well, what about industrial output?" Their response again, "We don't know." And you get the picture here. How can you address the problem if you can't even see the problem? How can you go to point B if you don't even know where you are to begin with? And this is where GDP provided that solution. GDP told us where we were on the map. It told us we were at point A, and it showed us the quickest route from point A to point B. It was a turning point in economics. So you've heard the term GDP being tossed around by politicians in speeches, or perhaps you've heard it from a soundbite in a media clip. In fact, in the UK's budget of 2022, the word GDP was referenced 47 times. And that was just a summary of the budget. So, what is GDP? GDP is an acronym that stands for Gross Domestic Product. It is a total monetary or market value of all finished goods and services produced within a given time period within a nation's borders. Now, it essentially functions as a scorecard for a nation's economic health. Now, it can be calculated in one of three ways. The first way is by calculating total output. The second, total expenditure. And third, the total income. Now, the most common way to approach it is by calculating the total expenditure, which can be given by the total consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net trade, which is simply exports minus imports. So 2 years after the inception of GDP, it faced its first real test, World War II. America now found itself in the biggest war in human history. Now, with GDP data in hand, it enabled America to calculate for the rate of economic output required to pay for the war. It ensured internal consumption was unaffected, whilst identifying the key areas of the economy which were underutilized and could be transformed for the purpose of the production of defense goods. Now, Nazi Germany, on the other hand, they struggled because they converted their economy into a full-fledged command economy with the sole purpose of sustaining the war effort. But this did not work because internal consumption dwindled, and that meant they had no money to fund the war efforts. A monumental success, GDP's place in policy making was now cemented and used by politicians and economists alike. So to answer the first question, do we need GDP? The answer? Yes, we do, no question about it. It is a reason why it's been used for over 70 years. Fast forward to today. GDP is religiously used by policymakers, and they can use it to make vital decisions for the community at large. It's a #1 priority for any government around the world, but it also has its shortfalls. Now, GDP is often paired with prosperity. I would like to challenge that notion. GDP in the US in 1990 stood at $5.5 trillion. Now, that's a whopping number. By 2020, only 30 years later, that figure had increased to $20.9 trillion US. That's a fourfold increase in the short span of only 30 years. Pretty impressive, right? That's from an outside perspective. You know what else increased in that same time period? Obesity. Obesity in America increased from 17% to 42% amongst all adults, causing somewhat of a health crisis. You know what else also increased? Carbon emissions. Carbon emissions ballooned from 22 billion in 1990 to 34 billion tons by 2020. The last area I want to draw your attention to is income inequality in the US. In 1990, the top 1% earned less than the bottom 50% of earners combined, as it should be, as you would think. In 2020, the top 1% of earners earned more than the bottom 50% combined. Now, that gap between rich and poor is a gap that only continues to widen and will continue to do so. Now, by definition, GDP accounts for recorded monetary exchanges. Now, those three words have been very problematic for GDP. Monetary exchanges does not specify what sort of transaction that is. It could be legal or illegal. I could be purchasing a game or a gun. Both of those will contribute to the end figure of GDP. On the other hand, work done which has no monetary value attached to it is not accounted for in GDP. Work done, for example, if you have ever taken care of an elderly person, if you have ever vacuumed your own room, or if you have ever cooked your own food, all of your labor and effort will count to nothing. In fact, GDP believes you are doing this for leisure. On the other hand, if you were to go and outsource all of these tasks, for example, put that elderly person in a care home, eat out at a restaurant, or hire a cleaner to vacuum your room, that will contribute to GDP. Now, the other word that causes consternation in that three-word definition is recorded. In informal countries, in countries with a large informal economy, it is estimated that 45% of total economic output in developing countries comes from the informal economy. Now, informal here doesn't mean illegal. It simply means unrecorded. So what about industrialized society? You would think that's quite different, right? Not really. Only 20% of industrialized society uses the informal economy. That's the total share of economic output. So the informal economy can refer to a variety of things. It could be day-to-day laborers working. It could be subsistence farmers. It could be contractors. Or on a more personal scale, it could be something like a garage sale or the income earned from selling lemonade at a stall on the side of the street as a kid. All of that is part of the informal economy. Now, let's take our map again. GDP showed us where we are on the map, but it didn't show us the full picture. It didn't tell us about the obstacles between point A to point B. It didn't tell us about the negative externalities or the problems it would cause to society. And in our pursuit for relentless economic growth, it has come at a great cost to all of us. I'm going to leave you all with a thought. As the way we live changes, the lifestyle changes with it, and the way we think changes as well. And the quote I want to leave you with is that we should measure what we want rather than wanting what we measure. Thank you.